Good evening, everybody. We think we're live, so that's good. And welcome to Hackney's Planning Committee. This is a pre-application meeting. Just to let you know, we think the council will be recording this meeting and live streaming.
Vincent, you're very quiet.
Oh, am I? Okay. I'll speak up then. Tell me if I go quiet. The council will be recording this meeting, so be aware that you're on in public. So please, be aware. If you can do, please mute yourselves if you're not speaking. I think it's mostly officers. There's no members of the public here. There's an issue with the chat. Apparently, that's problematic. So please minimise your use of the chat function. The purpose of this pre-application meeting is for, it's the only occasion where really councillors get to say what they think about applications, so it's a rare opportunity. But nevertheless, we still have to keep an open mind. Please don't start saying you think it's the best thing since sliced toast or you hate it. Ask questions, you can imply, if you will, if you think things are problematic. But please do keep an open mind. My name is Councillor Vincent Stopps and I should be chairing the meeting. We're meeting remotely because the government has insisted that we try and do what we can to keep the planning process going. And for those of you who have joined us first time, please don't use the chat function except for IT issues. I certainly won't be interacting with it. If you need to leave the meeting, we can stop actually if you need to leave the meeting, but please, members, keep your cameras on so we can see you contributing. I think Brian might have a problem in terms of his broadband, so we'll keep talking to Brian, make sure it's there. Hello, Brian. Oh. Go through the normal process. We will declare interests, etc. And I'll introduce you in just now, I guess, really. So from my top left, Michael, if you could introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Michael Levy, Springfield Ward.
Thank you. And Councillor Joseph, you're back. Congratulations and all of that. Welcome.
Yeah.
If you'd like to introduce yourself, Councillor Joseph.
Yes, good evening. I'm Councillor Claire Joseph of Victoria Ward. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you. Good to see you back. Katie?
Councillor Katie Hanson, Vice Chair of Planning.
Steve?
Councillor Steve Race, Fox Newson, Shoreditch Ward.
Peter?
Councillor Peter Snell from Dalston.
Okay, and Brian. Brian, you can't hear you, Brian.
Councillor Brian Bell, Brownsby Ward. Sorry, I'm a little hoarse at the moment.
Don't worry if you have to switch off. We'll keep talking to you, Brian, to make sure you're there. Want to introduce officers. I've got a new spiel written for me for the application, and I don't know where it invited me to ask officers. So I just wanted to describe who we've got here tonight. So we've got Natalie, our new substantive head of planning, I think. Congratulations. Natalie here to advise us. We've got Gareth, our committee officer, and we've got our legal officers, Christine up there, and a few other officers. We've only got one item, so I'll introduce most of you. We've got Rob Brew, who's head of, what do you lead? Growth team, is it?
Major applications.
Major applications. We've got Steve, who's the case officer today. We've got Peter Kelly, who's the design officer. And we've got, that's about all of us, isn't it? I don't know if Graham's around floating, I can't see him. Got a gentleman on the top right with glasses and headphones on. Hello.
Hello, I'm Leif.
Leif. Okay, you're Leif, yes. The tree man. Yes, of course. And young lady with the purple jumper
Hi, I'm Catherine, the project manager from Green Spaces team.
from.
The Green Spaces team, project manager.
Okay,
for
applicants.
Shoreditch
Okay.
Park Improvement Project. Thanks.
Okay, and I've got James. You're the applicant, essentially, aren't you?
Yeah, good evening. My name's James Virgo. I'm an associate director at LEC and the project landscape architect.
Okay, we've got Matt from Conservation and Graham, who does similar things to Rob, I think. I do get confused, I'm afraid, still. Okay, so I think that's all of us. It's everybody I can see anyway. So we'll kick off with apologies. So we've got one apology, haven't we, this evening?
That's correct, Chair, from Councillor Potter, yes.
Okay, and declarations of interest. Steve, you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Chad. So alongside the park being in Hoxton and Shoreditch, I'm also a member of the Shoreditch Park Development Board, which has been overseeing this transformation sort of project. So having taken advice, I'm going to participate in the pre-app planning meeting, but then we'll take another view when it comes to the actual planning application.
Okay, so that might change. Any other declarations of interest at all? I've got a minor one. People might remember I didn't take part in the Britannia application. That was because my wife's a governor on the Shoreditch school, but I think this is a separate application, so I'm happy to take part. I've got nothing else to tell people under item 3, and we've got no other minutes.
That's
So
correct.
we'll
It's
go.
been a while since we've done a pre-app meeting, so no minutes that I'm aware of.
Yeah, no minutes that we know of or we can remember. No minutes we can remember, certainly. Don't know when the last pre-app was. So I've done all that. Welcome people, apologise. So what we're going to do, James, is we're going to give you, we're going to talk to Steve for a few minutes. He's going to introduce it. And then we're going to give you about 15 minutes to present your application or your proposals to us. So over to, where is Steve? You've got your camera on, Steve?
Yes, I've just turned it on. Yep.
Okay, so just let me make sure I can change the layout. Ah, that's better. I can see more people now. Okay, so over to you, Steve, then, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just give a very brief introduction to the item before handing over to James to deliver the presentation. So the proposals are for improvements to Shoreditch Park. There's been a lot of sort of change around Shoreditch Park recently with large developments taking place. For instance, the Britannia Leisure Centre development, Colville Estate redevelopment, and other developments around Old Street and Shoreditch. So the improvements to the park would be very welcome to make that space sort of meet the requirements of the all the sort of development that's taken place around it for need for open space and leisure and sport and so on. Just to clarify, the Britannia Leisure Centre development did include a number of sort of improvements around sort of tree planting around the new leisure centre, which went where the sort of tennis courts used to go on the eastern edge of the park next to Pitfield Street, and also public realm improvements along the northern edge, which I think it was called sort of Grange Street at the time of the application. Just to clarify, those are separate from these current proposals, so they're going to be delivered as part of the Britannia application. So that what's going to be the end result would be the sort of what's proposed as part of the Shoreditch Park improvement project, and then also the Britannia improvements as well. I just also, it's probably worth highlighting the proposals have been in development since 2020 for the improvements to Shoreditch Park. They've been subject to public consultation, a number of events. So the applicants probably want to touch on that a bit further. Some positive feedback received around the different sort of aspects of the improvement project. The application is planned to be submitted in 2021. There's a little typo in the report, actually. It's the development the project sort of commenced in 2020 with application in 2021. Other than that, I think I'll hand over to James now. Thank you.
James, please.
Thank you. I'm going to attempt to share my presentation. Hopefully everyone can see this presentation. So this is going to be a fly-through presentation of the proposals for Shoreditch Park as they stand at the moment. We recently went to consultation, second round of consultation towards the end of last year, and subsequent to that we've had various conversations with planning officers and other tree and ecology specialists within the council as well. So we're still tying up a lot of the detail. There's still a few things to be resolved and worked up, but this is where we are at the moment with the scheme. And as I say, I'll go through and I'll touch on all of the main proposals. This is the kind of the master plan that we went to consultation with. So this kind of covers the whole site and shows it in context with the Britannia Leisure Centre scheme. The crux of the scheme really is within these kind of key areas. So and I'll touch on all of these as I go through, but just to summarise now. It involves the playgrounds, a complete refurbishment of the existing children's playground, some works to Bridport Place, a complete improvement of the existing sports pitch, which is currently in bad condition, a new sports hub with a kind of plaza space that kind of sits next to the adventure playground. And that also includes the relocated Javelin Man statue, which used to be in front of Britannia, or probably still is, but it was a planning condition for the Britannia scheme for it to be relocated within the park. So we've included that within our scheme. And also some improvements, Dorothy Fertil gardens, and some other path and fence improvements as well. So, children's playgrounds. We looked at lots of different potential areas to relocate the playgrounds. It was identified in the consultation as an area that could do with improvement. It's quite a large space, and I think some people felt that it was underused in some areas. We've kind of ended up with kind of deciding to leave it in its existing location. It works quite well in that space. The only difference being to the fence line along Rushton Street, where it would be pushed back slightly in order to kind of create more of a verge and improve the street frontage with Rushton Street, but also to allow a perimeter running track around that edge. Currently, the area to the left there is a kind of enclosed kind of dog leg space, so that would kind of open that up. And I'll touch more on that perimeter walking route as I go through. We looked at trying to keep as much of the existing play equipment as there as possible. A lot of it is in quite bad condition and could do with being replaced, although we're looking at retaining one of the existing big cradle swings that's there at the moment, but that's kind of detail to look at as we go on. It's a complete overhaul of the existing space, and it's better use of the space, I think. There's a lot of equipment in there, a lot of standard play equipment, lots of swings, which are always popular, sands, play equipment, lots of climbing stuff as well. The main focus is this large mound, which kind of forms the spine, which would have a an accessible route, so a 1 in 21, a DDA compliant route up there. So say someone in a wheelchair or with a pram, for example, could kind of get up and down it easily, but also lots of playful routes up and down as well. And we try to incorporate as much inclusive design within it as well. So thinking about how a range of children and parents and carers can move around the space freely as well. And here is just some, these are just some examples of the types of equipment. They're not really the exact pieces of equipment. We'd like to use more timber. It's quite warm. It's nice using kind of natural materials, but using things like kind of metal feet to lift it off the ground, improve its robustness, longevity as well. And it'd be a mixture of catalogue equipment with some kind of more kind of rustic kind of carved logs for balancing and stepping up the slopes, for example. This is the Sports Hub and Tree Plaza. So this is the area, this is the adventure playground just to the right here, and this is Bridport Place just on the left. There was some strong feedback during the consultation about more facilities for sports that were free to use as well. We've incorporated a new Muga space that shares the boundary with the adventure playground, and that would be a free to use kind of hard ball surface, probably basketball mainly, but that also includes the beach volleyball courts that is currently in the children's playground, so that would be relocated and given a new home here in a proper setting, which would be slightly sunk into the ground in order to keep the sand in place, try and stop it blowing around everywhere, with some dedicated seating with it as well. There was also a strong requirement for an outdoor gym space as well. So we've included a range of different bits of equipment, some table tennis tables. I think there are currently 2 in the existing playground, so they again would kind of come out and sit within that area. And then also this kind of tree, but we've been calling it a tree plaza space. Something that came out of the first consultation that we did with some of the local kids was that a lot of people said the park didn't have a heart, it didn't have a centre to it. And so we've really had that in our minds throughout the whole design process in terms of trying to create an area that was maybe just kind of like for seating, maybe amongst some trees as well, in order to kind of continue the tree belt that runs around that southern section. And that area would also include the relocated Javelin Man statue that sits in the middle there as well. There is a storage container that currently sits on site as well, which includes some sports equipment, I believe, and that would be relocated to the south. There was also a requirement for a welfare facility for kind of council staff, maintenance staff to use, which essentially is a storage container, so they would kind of sit together in that area. We haven't really looked in great detail in terms of what the finish of that is, but we imagine they'll be clad and would look a bit more softer and a bit more integrated into the design rather than an actual storage container. And also just a small kind of depot space for green waste, so putting kind of grass cuttings, that kind of thing, rather than taking it all off site, which is what currently happens. This is just some example of some of the bits of equipment that we were looking at to be refined and agreed. This is the perimeter running track. Currently, there's quite a lot of fencing in the park, and it's not possible to run the entire length of the perimeter. So we were looking at pushing back some of the fences in order to achieve that. The playground is obviously a kind of key to unlocking that. So actually, kind of pushing that back gives you that kind of that perimeter route, which frees up space in the middle as well, stops people running. So many people stop running straight through the middle and clashing with people who are just there walking. And the internal route is nearly a kilometre. It's just over, which is quite a convenient, neat, round number as well. And we're looking at putting some markings or something on the ground as well, so people can actually kind of track the distance. Bridport Place is the road that kind of runs through the centre, and the remnant, I suppose, of the historic layout. Obviously, this was all old historic kind of terrace streets, and that is still apparent along Bridport Place. Which is part of its problem as well, because I think it looks like a road, and the problem is that a lot of people treat it like a road, so lots of people cycling down it at speed, which leads to some clashes with pedestrians. So we're looking at cycle deterrents, so rumble strips maybe at the top and the bottom, but also looking to narrow it slightly and adding in a chicane through the middle by adding in these rain gardens down the centre. So it kind of narrows the width of it down to a path, so it kind of feels like the paths in the rest of the park, but still maintains the curb alignment, so that kind of that historic road still runs through. I should apologise as well, because this image doesn't include the historic light fittings that do currently run along the edge by the trees, and they are going to be retained, but we need to give a bit more thought in terms of the relationship between the rain garden in the foreground here and those light fittings. The rain garden itself as well would be designed to be seasonally wet and seasonally dry as well. It would take some of the surface runoff and also the runoff from the Muga as well, which would obviously generate a lot of surface water in periods of heavy rain. Dorothy Fertil Gardens is quite an unusual part of the park. It has a different language to the rest of the park, and it was actually the first bit that was laid out in the 60s, so it has a more of a kind of garden-like feel to it. And I think when Britannia is finished as well, it's going to have quite a different feeling to it, because it will obviously have a direct relationship with that building. I think part of the problem with that space at the moment is that there are quite a few dead corners and some kind of some spaces that are inaccessible, benches that kind of sit in the middle of grass. There's obviously a desire line that runs straight over the top of the mound. So the approach with this space is to try and open it up a bit more, kind of formalise that path straight over the middle, to actually turn that into a path, so anyone who is just cutting straight through the path, the park can use that rather than walking through the mud. But this was also an area that we were looking at removing some of the railings as well, and opening the entrances, so it kind of feels, so the opening space feel a lot more generous, a lot more welcoming, but actually keeping some of the fences along Pickfield Street and along Minton Street as well, and adding in some hedge planting as well, just so it is a lot more open and a lot more accessible, but still has a feeling of enclosure to it as well. It's not completely open on those two sides. It also includes a small play trail that runs around the edge as well, which is kind of like sawn timber logs, that kind of thing, but just an informal play trail that leads towards the main children's playground. Ecological enhancement is one of the key themes that we've tried to embed in all of the proposals, so rather than just small isolated interventions here and there. Other than the kind of the rain gardens that I've already spoke about, we've been looking at putting in kind of hedgerows with UK native species, particularly beefing up the hedge along New North Road as well. Linear habitat's really good for kind of certain kind of foraging of kind of small animals and bats as well. So that's definitely kind of a good thing to include. Log piles dotted around in certain areas as well. The The biggest issue with this park is obviously the soil condition, and that stems from the shallow soils, because they're sitting on top of lots of kind of old building foundations and loads of rubble as well. So it's quite shallow in places, and that really manifests itself during the year as well. So during the summer, it's obviously very dry. The grass looks very kind of parched and withered in some areas, and then during the winter, it can be quite waterlogged because a lot of the soil is quite compacted. So obviously, we're looking at improving the sports pitches, which is one of the worst areas, but also looking at integrating kind of wildflower meadow planting as well, that would be more suited to that soil condition, but also looking at some areas where we can relax the growing the grass areas as well, just to kind of make it feel a bit more wilder and kind of it would be good for kind of certain other ecological habitats for invertebrates, that kind of thing as well. But with mown paths run through it and mown edges, so it doesn't feel like it's been completely abandoned and left to go wild. These are just some images, just to give you some ideas of what we're thinking. Boundaries, this was something that we were asked to look at within our brief. We were asked to explore whether there was potential for removing some of the fences in order to make the park feel a lot more open. We went out to consultation with this. We went quite hard with the proposal for the consultation to kind of test the idea, and there was some mixed comments that came back. Some people were very keen on the idea in terms of it feeling a lot more open. Other people were concerned about it being too open in terms of kind of dogs and children as well. This is still very much in development at the moment. We're still talking to the board about this. Currently, this proposal is showing retention of the boundary railings to the north of Bridport Place, Poole Street and New North Road. So there is this kind of enclosed top section, a kind of part removal around Dorothy Fertil, which I'd already talked about. Obviously, there is kind of fencing around the Muga and around the adventure playground, which needs to be retained. But potentially removing it around this kind of southern corner on Minton Street and Bridport Place. But say that is still to be agreed on that one. Entrances. Obviously, the existing park entrances are through the gates, which are identified on this plan by the blue dots. The orange ones are the new ones that we would look to create by removing some of the fences or kind of creating new entrances in some places. New entrance into the children's playground off of Rushton Street here, and new entrance that's related to the outdoor gym area. And obviously 2 new entrance points in the corners of Dorothy Fertil. And these are just some very quick mock-up images. This is the corner of Pitfield Street and Minton Street looking at Dorothy Fertil. So really kind of like widening that splay, opening it up, but keeping the fencing with a new hedge along the main runs. This one is one of the entrances off New North Road. This is just looking at removing one of the fencing panels in order to widen that splay, make it feel a bit more open, a bit more welcoming, maybe something in the ground plane that says Shoreditch Park, so you feel like you're entering into a park and crossing a threshold. And lastly, last couple of slides, just something on seating. Currently there is a fair bit of seating in the park at the moment, but a lot of it seems to be bunched up in this north section and covered in bird poo. A lot of it kind of sits in the grass and isn't accessible. So there's a lot of sculptural benches as well. There's a few memorial benches. We're intending to retain all of those, all the sculpture pieces, the artistic interventions and the memorial benches, but integrating new seats along paths and spreading it out a little bit more across the park rather than kind of bunching it all in one area. And these are just some images of the types. I think this is the traditional kind of hackney bench with kind of back and armrests, but also looking at more informal seating areas. This is actually a picture of a scheme that we completed recently for the Royal Parks, which is using kind of gabion baskets with insect hotels integrated into their bases, but with timber slatted tops, which are quite nice, quite playful, but also circular benches around trees and even just logs in some areas, particularly in the playground as well. And that is it. That is the scheme in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. That was great to run through. Can I? I'll throw this open to members first, and probably go to Brian first. But could I just ask the planning officer, what of this needs planning permission? Why couldn't they get on with most of this and just start shoveling some earth around or whatever?
Well, the council does have permitted development rights for to do a lot of sort of works in parks itself. You know, landscaping, benches, and that sort of thing. So it's not completely clear. You know, it's a sort of a matter of fact and degree was what needs planning permission, what doesn't. I think the main things that would likely need planning permission is the sort of the largest structures. So, for instance, like the Muga, the fencing around it, and things like that would be the ones that sort of most likely to need planning permission. And given that it's a sort of comprehensive application or comprehensive proposals for the whole of the park, it kind of makes sense for things to be considered in the round, really, all the sort of improvement works together.
Okay, but the red line goes around all of it, all the green stuff there.
Yeah, around the entire edge. Yeah.
Okay. So now I've got lots of questions, but I'm sure others have as well. Brian, would you like to ask the first question? Brian, can you hear me? Oh, he's left the meeting. Okay, well, let's go on to Katie then, please.
I don't have anything, a question in particular. I was very keen on some of the images you showed us about things like benches with gabion insect hotels underneath, rather than just traditional benches. Okay. And I'm always a big fan of benches where it's got something behind it, like a wall or a hedge, because I think one of the things about benches in parks is if someone can come up behind you, you never feel very safe and secure somehow. Mm-hmm. And if we want people to sit on the benches and do things like read books and whatever, it looked as though that sort of thing was designed in. So I like the look of that. But I don't have a specific question, Chair, I'm afraid.
Okay, Claire, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for that. I think it's really a really interesting plan. I mean, I've got a few questions really. I like a lot of it. I was a little bit concerned about the reduction in the railings, just because this park is really used a lot by people with small children and, as you mentioned, dogs. I mean, I think some people even describe it as a bit of a dog park. So the idea of them not having this sort of barrier or easily wandering out onto the street. I know those side streets might look quite quiet, but there's also quite a lot of blind bends, for example, on Rushton Street. So I'm just wondering, how are you going to make the decision whether or not to keep railings or at least hedges or some sort of barrier? That's my first question. Shall I go on, or shall we?
Yes,
okay. Another one is just picking up on what Katie said about the benches. I welcome the 25 with backs, and I agree with Katie. I think just thinking about people's comfort, really. Older people with small children, maybe breastfeeding mums, I think having a back to a bench is a lot more comfortable. So I'd probably be more inclined to sort of go that way. Another point is, have we thought about including a public toilet? During lockdown, I think that was a major problem for a lot of people, trying to get out and about, not being able to access a toilet. And since we are having this investment in the park, I really think people with young families and older people would welcome that. So I'd be interested in hearing your views on that. The wildflowers, I think that sounds great. I'd like to hear what kind of things you thought about planting. And maybe water fountains, drinking fountains, or even like some kind of water feature outside for people to play in the summer that's free. I know there's going to be a massive swimming pool on the same site, but I've got more, but I don't want to be greedy, so I'll leave it at that.
Right. I can talk through.
James.
I've written them down. And in terms of the boundaries, as I say, I mean, this is part of a long running discussion, and yeah, it's still kind of rumbling on, really. As I say, there were kind of like a lot of mixed comments that came back, and I think it was probably the thing that most people felt strongly about, either for or against. The honest answer is I don't know actually how we're going to kind of come to that. I mean, that is really kind of further conversation with the project board and my client team on that one. But yeah, I can't really kind of say too much else on that one at the moment, I'm afraid. In terms of the benches, yeah, obviously, yeah, including a large number of seats that have back and armrests is really important, so that, you know, anyone can kind of sit on those regardless of their kind of physical abilities. So the thinking was really actually that the kind of like the main areas off the main paths would be the kind of traditional benches, but then in the playground specifically, there would be more of a mixture. And in the tree plaza, there would be a bit of a mixture as well, particularly with some of the sports, in some of the sports areas as well, where you may want to kind of sit on a seat from both sides, say, rather than just kind of like, you know, kind of sitting on it on one side. So, but the playground would include lots of different seating types that would be scattered around with the play equipment as well, so parents and carers can kind of sit while their kids play on specific bits of equipment. In terms of toilets, that's something that we discussed really earlier on. I think the thinking was behind that was that obviously Britannia is going to be open when this work is complete, and there are toilets in there. So it was...
Could I just add on that? Yeah, in terms of the public toilets, the Britannia Leisure Centre has a cafe in it, and as part of that application, there's a commitment that the toilets for the cafe will be publicly accessible for use by anybody. It doesn't matter, you know, they don't have to be customers. Anyone would be able to use the public toilets of the Leisure Centre cafe.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, that was a planning condition for the Britannia Leisure Centre that this committee agreed to. So it's, you know, it would be against the law for that not to be the case.
Good. And drinking fountains was your final one.
Yeah, there is actually a drinking fountain that we're proposing for, like, inside the children's playground as well. I mean, there could potentially be one outside the children's playground as well. We could look at if there are strong feelings about that. The other one I wrote down was wildflowers as well. I mean, yeah, we need to kind of start looking at more of the detail in terms of species and mixes, particularly for trees as well. So that is very much kind of next stage detailed design.
Okay, let's show of hands then. Brian. Brian, have you frozen again? No. Michael, please.
Thank you, thank you, Chair. I just trying to get my head around the area which has been designated for beach volleyball. Sounds to me that it's very from more exotic climes than our climate can bear. I just wonder, is there demonstrable demand for a beach volleyball court where I would have thought they'd be unusable for great swathes of the year, with waterlogging and so on and so forth? I mean, is that considered to be the best use of that space?
Good question.
Yeah, in answer, yes, it is kind of quite well used. There is a local group, and I've completely forgotten the name. It's like the London Volleyball Association, or God, sorry, I can't remember the exact name, but they there's a local group that that do use it quite a lot, and they were heavily involved in the consultation of this scheme as well. So they're very keen on it being retained and using it. And my understanding as well is that it is a growing sport within London as well. More people are playing it year round as well. It's not just a kind of a summer game, but I've worked on other schemes before as well, where with the beach volleyball court, where it's also been used for tag rugby as well. And but I know currently it's in the playground and it is used. I know a lot of children use it as well as part of the playground. So it's there, I think, as a kind of quite a flexibly used space. If it's really hot and it's not being used, people can lay in it as well.
Okay, I understand. I accept that. A couple more,
Yes,
Chair. Can I carry on?
Yes.
I want to echo Claire's remarks about the removal of the railings. What happens, I think, is it becomes it's an open area. It becomes less secure. It allows unauthorized entry for people who are perhaps using motorbikes and things like areas where it becomes it's a seamless transition between the street outside and the park area. Children can wander in and out. Is there perhaps some thought of putting some natural barriers in instead of railings if railings aren't supported?
Can we? I mean, it would be like Hackney Downs, wouldn't it, or Wells Street Common? So there is some understanding of these issues. The closest we've got Peter here, the urban designer. Any thoughts about that, Peter, before we go to James?
Well, it's one of the questions we've been discussing with James, who's very open. The whole team is very open to discussing this. So the consultation report shows that people want the park to be more welcoming, more accessible, have more gateways, and removing the railings is part of responding to that public demand. But we're still discussing where, if anywhere, is the right place to take away railings. But our thoughts are, well, my thoughts were that parks are best. Well, a lot of parks have had their railings taken away in the past and are now reinstating them for the reasons that you've discussed. They create a distinction between inside the park and outside the park. They stop unauthorized access. People can't drive across the edges. They create safety and enclosure, but they're still visually permeable. But we do think that there could be some opportunities, for example, in the Dorothy Fertil garden, to sort of remove some of those railings. Yeah.
To what point? I mean, what would be achieved by removing them? I mean, if they were left where they were, there at least there would be a sense of security, which would be removed if they were removed.
Okay, James, tell us a bit more. Have you looked at our other parks? So Wells Street Common, have you got a view on that? Can't hear you.
You're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm a Hackney resident as well, so I'm familiar with a lot of the kind of the local spaces. As I say, it was something that we were asked to investigate because if Catherine is there, did you? I don't know whether you can kind of.
Hi. So. Yeah, so Hackney's looking at opening up a lot of our parks to, as part of the Labour manifesto, it was mentioned as well, and it was signed off at Cabinet, but we're looking at opening up sections of parks to allow more movement and connection between green spaces. But if we remove any railings, please note that we would be replacing it with something that would cause an obstruction, so vehicles can't just enter the site. So it would be boulders or logs, dead wood, planting. We can provide more information on that as part of the planning application, and once we've made a decision with the board on what the the designs will look like.
Well, I guess Steve wants to say something, but I guess as a minimum, we need to learn from our other parks and do it passively so we can put them back in if it turns out to be a disaster. But I mean, in principle, being able to walk across Welsh Street Common at will is quite nice, and so I guess there are two ways of looking at it. Steve, have you got anything to say on that?
Yeah, sorry, thank you, Chair. I was just going to point out that Hackney Council does also have a connecting green spaces policy, which is about sort of making sure that green spaces don't only exist within parks that are fenced off and everything outside is not a green space. And so I think lots of the conversation throughout the process of this is around how to make parks more accessible. And just on the point about security, I think there's a real difference of opinion. Some people feel more safe by there having lots of fencing. Other people feel less safe, actually. And so talking to local residents, lots of people feel safer if there are more exits and more open spaces to get out of sort of individual kind of areas. And then I would just say, in terms of the fencing as well, and the kind of the spaces in which the gates in which you currently get into Shoreditch Park are very narrow, and in a sort of time when we're meant to be a bit more socially distanced, it sort of feels like it makes more sense to allow more space for people to get in and out, and it makes the park much more accessible. I think so. Lots of the conversation that I've been having with local residents around this is around sort of accessibility for the park. And there's a balance to be struck, and I think expanding the sort of girth of the entrances, the sort of the width of the entrances, is and some taking away some of the fencing whilst keeping some of the fencing around, for example, New North Road, where there's quite a busy road there. So keeping the fencing there feels like it's a good sort of middle way, I suppose, for that.
Okay, thank you. That's a reasonable discussion. Unless everybody else, Claire, you've had a few. Peter, come in, please.
Well, first of all, I'd say that I welcome all the points made by our urban design team and hope they'll be addressed. I think the issue of fences or no fences, it very much depends. And also, in fact, lighting and no lighting very much depends on how the area is used. I know when I was chair of London Fields Users Group many years ago, we were told we were a bit weird because basically we wanted the routes through in regular uses and we wanted lots of lights. And my take on Shoreditch Park is there are different areas where the users will have different views for what they should be. So I think we have to listen to local people on this and make sure that the consultation is done effectively. Some points. I mean, my main knowledge of this park is on cycling through down the Bridport Place area, and I always respect people who are not on bicycles, but I am a bit concerned. I mean, we're not trying to restrict what is a popular bicycle route, are we? I mean, you talk about this chicane or something, but we are going to maintain that as, I hope, a popular cycle route, because certainly our view here is generally extra use is extra safety and extra protection. I totally welcome the very good idea of a running track, because the problem we have at the moment with a whole load of parks around London is people run around the outside and you get this absolutely dead area trampled into mud. But of course, the problem with traditional running tracks, and this, I'm a former athlete as well, this is not the sort of track people are going to be sprinting on, but there are a few of those littered around London, and they're normally so badly surfaced they're completely unfit to use. Neither would I like this to see a trampled muddy area as exists around London Fields and one or two other places. So my question is, are we going to put a surface on this that actually is quite robust? Because for runners going out early in the morning, serious about their training, the idea of sprint recoveries on different legs of the run is quite popular, and it'll probably happen when there aren't many other users in the park. So this isn't designed for high-speed running, but it is a useful exercise facility. But please, can we have something that doesn't wear away and look absolutely, becomes unsafe and is absolutely unusable in winter? And then my final questions were involving the child involvement in play design. You've talked about involvement, but you haven't really explained how it went. And children are wonderful for really knowing what they want. They often go to several playgrounds and they know exactly what they want. And I just hope that's being done in a systematic way. And then the last one is also the management of the play space, so it stays safe, but probably even more, management of sports space. I'm never quite sure when we have mugas or when we have table tennis tables, do the biggest people come in and take control and frighten everybody else away? So how do those spaces get managed? And then just one last one, wildflower meadows. I don't think they work. I'm sorry. The one in the Olympic Park, it looks a mess these days. The one in London Fields, we got huge grief because we were using pesticide to kill off all the plants, and now it's just a patch of weeds. Doesn't look very pleasant at all. So my understanding of wildflower meadows is they need constant sustaining, and they only ever work on extremely impoverished soils. And I don't think this fits the bill. So I'm not sure. It's a great idea.
Let's try and get some answers to those.
Okay, thank you.
James, have a go at a few of those.
Sure. Okay. So Bridport Place, cycling, I probably should have been clearer about that. That's not to deter cycling. That's just to kind of slow cyclists down. It's quite wide, that surface at the moment. And I think the problem is people do actually treat it like a road. So they do speed along it. And there have been a few issues, I think, with that, with certain people. So the idea is to narrow the path slightly by kind of eating into it with the rain gardens, so that cyclists can still use it, but it obviously encourages them to slow down because you've got less space there. The Santander cycle docking station is still there and going to stay there. We did look at moving it out of there and moving onto the main road, but it proved to be kind of too expensive and difficult and didn't kind of work within the budget. So we're working with it, staying where it is at the moment. But as I say, no, not to discourage cycling, just slow cyclists down. The running track surface. So there is obviously there's a park running track that's there at the moment that runs around some of the edges. That perimeter route that we've designed is really, I suppose, it's kind of extending some of the bark mulch surfaces that's there at the moment, but it's also designed to use some of the pavements and some of the harder surfaces that are there. I suppose we really considered it in terms of an informal jogging track, similar to a lot of the other parks, similar to London, to Clissold Park, for example. But there is certainly scope to include a section on a piece of macadam that could be, kind of sprintable. So we can kind of look at that in more detail. But the idea was that it was kind of quite informal bark mulch, kind of around the majority of the grass areas, particularly, rather than anything that's too kind of too hard and too kind of urban. The playground. So yeah, the consultation focused on the playground a lot. Unfortunately, Emma, the consultation advisor, is not with us tonight, but I know that she has engaged with a lot of schools and a lot of local groups that have spoken about the playground in particular. A lot of the types of play equipment that is included is very much kind of led by them as well. Catherine, you've unmuted like you're about to add.
I actually did consultation with all of the schools in the surrounding area, ended up in sessions with 1,000 people, and ran workshops. They get to provide drawings of what they wanted to see, so they were very much involved in the consultation and design of the play equipment.
The Muga and the kind of the use of those spaces. I mean, we've kind of designed the Muga. I mean, the Muga, we spoke earlier on in the process about kind of fencing, and agreed that, you know, it kind of needed fencing. Obviously, it needs to be designed to best practice and have 2 gates, you know, kind of to avoid kind of anti-bullying as well. So you don't just got 1 gate that someone can block, for example. So I mean, it was designed to be, you know, kind of like free, open use, really, rather than something that was, you know, kind of managed and, you know, kind of paid for. I suppose Britannia, you know, obviously includes a lot of new sports facilities which need to be booked and I think paid for as well. But I'd say this was designed to be something that was freely accessible. And just lastly, in terms of the Wildflower Meadow, I mean, it is impoverished soil. I mean, the soil condition is quite bad in some areas across the site, which actually makes it suitable for certain kind of wildflower meadow species. With all of these things, it is about maintenance. You know, it's all very well kind of putting it down from day one and looking great, but how's it going to look in a couple of years' time? Part of our brief was to consider anything that we propose in terms of its maintenance and the cost of that, and the council's kind of ongoing costs. So this is something that we need to look at in more detail at the next design stage. But yes, it's not a case of just kind of doing something that looks good on day one and then looks naff in a year's time. So
thank you. Can I ask a few now? I guess these are comments, really. Just take them and think about them. The Muga fence height, we made a big fuss in London Fields about the height of the fence and managed to get it to a reasonable, I think it's about 8 feet. They wanted about 15 feet to start with. And if you could replicate that, that would be really good. Because, you know, I don't think this is a park. It's not a pins issue, but London Fields was, and we kept the fence down, and it seems to work and well used, that Muga. Which takes me on to the next point, and that is inclusion. There are, if you go to Clissold Park, it doesn't feel very inclusive. It feels very white, middle class. I wonder if you could really do some thinking as to, you know, what local folks are thinking about and what they need. I know youngsters seem to love that Muga in the middle of I know it was criticised by some groups, the London Fields one, but it is very, very well used by local people. So there's some attractions there for some groups. The outdoor gym in London Fields is well used, and I'm sure that one will. We've got a spare outdoor gym on Mabley Green that we put as far away as we possibly could, because we were given it by somebody in the part of the Olympics. So that equipment doesn't seem to be used to this day, but I know the London Fields equipment is used well. The railings, I think the railings are interesting, and I don't know what the answer is. Instinctively, I'd like to see them open. It sounds like a good idea to try it out on a few sides. The lighting, yes, the lighting is interesting there. I don't know what the story is. I think they're reproduced lighting systems, but it harks back to the good old days. The sea containers, there's criticism of sea containers. I guess that's a cost thing. Bridport Place, I regret as actually putting a line down through London Fields and making it into a cycling corridor. I think the more highways we can keep highways engineers out of parks, the better it is. So clearly, yes, I think me and Peter would want people to be cycling, but cycling at about 8 miles an hour like we do. And please, let's not have lines. And in London Fields parks, we've got one of these things that flashes when you're doing more than 12 miles an hour. I'm sure nobody takes any notice of it. We don't want any highways engineering. They were going to put highways engineering in Millfields Park with the super highway going through there. So can we have it looking like a park, please, but allowing sensible cycling? The cycle hire, it's disappointing you can't take that stuff out. I don't know why it's not on the street. If they had come to planning to get permission to put that stuff in, I'm sure we would have said no, because you know, why on earth bike racks and like that are on parkland, I just do not know, and I don't know how it got there in the first place. Trees, we've had a big hit about the trees, the plane trees, glorious plane trees. It doesn't sound like plane trees will fit into this the soil that you've got there, but if you you know, we're always looking for opportunities for serious trees. There was a whole load that were taken down as part of the Britannia development, I know, and that caused quite a some disappointment. So it is possible to put trees on that site because we've taken some down in the past. If we can think about plane trees, that would be, there was a lovely run of plane trees up Pitfield Street, the edge there. Recreating that would be a good thing. Good to have the toilets there being used. The management of those out of hours, out of cafe hours will be important. Yeah, so all good. Thank you very much. That's me had my say. Anybody else want a few extras? Michael and then Claire.
Thank you, Chair. I think you might have touched upon it, but I'm just concerned about the 5.8 in 5.8 in urban design regarding the containers. I think they're totally incongruous in a green space, out of place, and I mean, and obviously the report suggests a more permanent structure would be preferred. But if they can't be installed, perhaps we can ensure that they are properly screened from sort of view. Otherwise, it's just, you know, it's completely out of place and incongruous, and really isn't a good outcome for a park to use containers at all. But there's one in the rugby club at where we are at Springfield, and it just looks out of, you know, a brand new clubhouse, and next to it we've got this awful looking container. I was wondering whether we can address this.
Quick comment, I suspect it's a money thing, is it?
So that currently there is a storage container there that just kind of sits in the middle of the grass at the moment, and I'm kind of quite keen to move that in an area that's a bit more kind of inconspicuous. I'm not actually sure what is in there, but my understanding is that it's used, and there is equipment in there, the sports equipment, I think, that is kind of used quite a lot. So there is a need on site to have that facility. I agree, though, that it needs to kind of move out of the way and be kind of less conspicuous. The additional storage container, there was a requirement for a welfare facility, and this is a, you know, kind of like an off the lorry kind of like system, which is formed from an old storage container. So the two will kind of sit neatly together, but it is very much about how they're integrated in the park, how they're screened, so they don't look like storage containers, basically. So.
Well, we'll take some interest in that, because you will need planning permission, I think, to put an extra storage container. Well, at least I hope you will, and we'll take a view as to that when it comes. Claire.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, just as a final point, I just wanted to sort of emphasise that, I mean, there really isn't a lot in the area in terms of parks. That this would be my nearest local park, and I live up in Old Street. So maybe that would give you an idea. It really gets quite busy, and ultimately it's going to get smaller because, you know, we're building Britannia Leisure Centre on the park essentially. So what I'm thinking is, in the playground, I think what might work well, and I can see you've included it in quite a few of your designs, is that some of the play equipment is sort of double storied. So you might have like a slide a sort of climbing frame on one part, and then another climbing frame that goes over the top. And I just think things like that are a really good way of getting children of different ages, like younger ones sort of on the lower level stuff, and older ones climbing on the top, and things like that. And I think maybe just to sort of use that space as creatively as possible, just because in the summer it just gets so busy. I think it would be quite nice to, because I know the adventure park's there, and that's obviously on multiple levels. You're not doing anything to the adventure park, are you? I think, well, you can tell me if that's the same.
Not in our brief, no.
Okay, and that's not actually accessible just to your regular child going to the park. That's something that has to be booked either through schools or forest schools. I think ordinarily, when I've taken children there, it's been locked. Steve's shaking his head, so maybe he's got other news on that. But yeah, I'm taking kids there quite a lot, and we've not been able to access the adventure playground, so I don't know if that's changed now. But also, just one final point with the fountains, brilliant, there'll be drinking fountains, and maybe if they could be on different levels. So I don't know if there could be like a lower fountain for young children who might quite like to take a drink independently. And I know in that park where so many people take dogs, so maybe those dog water fountains might be quite popular. I mean, I don't have a dog, but I think with dog owners, they're quite popular.
As long as it's not a bright blue Mary of London fountain. Steve, you had a response to Claire for that?
The adventure playground essentially is staffed, so when there are staff there, anyone can go along, and there are times at which it's just open. You know, when the staff are there, Hackney colleagues are there, then kids will go, and you don't need to be booked or anything. But it's not open access for anyone at 24 hours a day, because it's quite significant pieces of kit in there as well. I just wanted to make a point for the planning committee as well, that the Britannia Leisure Centre does not take up any of the park. It sits on the footprint of the old tennis courts, and given that there are more tennis courts being built on top, that's not actually taking away from the park. And the tennis courts are often used as moped lessons during the day as well. So
would we have to do that on the roof?
No, thankfully they can go somewhere else and do that. Okay,
thank you. I think we've had plenty to ask, and so we'll have even more probably when we come to the meeting. We've had a full hour, almost hour and 10 minutes at this. So if anybody else has got anything, have a go at Steve. Perhaps is probably the easiest way before the planning committee, before it becomes a live application. Thank you very much, everybody. I think that's it, and good luck with the application. When are you going to put an application in? James,
March, I think.
When?
Around March, we're hoping.
Okay, good luck with that then. So thank you, and we don't have a chance to go for a beer or chat to everybody afterwards. So we just wave goodbye to each other. Could I talk to Mario and Natalie just after we've all